Hello, everyone. Delighted to be here today. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share a few ideas on maximizing your site potential. And so let me get some things out of the way. So I'm Hazel Borys from Planning, Property, and Development for the City of Winnipeg. There we go. So you know what? I'm having some technical difficulties here. I'll be right back with you. Let me clean up some screens for a second here. And I'm assuming you see just a picture full of, um, just a screen full of a picture. And if you don't, if you see speaking notes, please let me know.
No, we're seeing the nice presentation, and the slide is on 4 billion downtown.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you for the affirmation. So, while downtown has enjoyed approximately $4 billion of new investment over the last 20 years, within the last just 14 months, an additional 1.8 billion has been committed to housing, prioritizing downtown and affordable housing, thanks in part to the Housing Accelerator Fund, the Affordable Housing Now, and tax increment financing, plus the private investment that those funds and others have sparked. Centerplan also re-envisions a downtown post-pandemic and in the age of Amazon. And since adoption last September, it charts a new course with input from key downtown communities who are making a difference, along with downtown developers at every scale. In 2024, about 18,000 people lived downtown, and we're looking to at least double that by 2050, thanks to the city's focus on accelerating housing development. Many of these red dots are underway, like the Granite Curling Club, Railside at the Forks, Portage Place, and Market Lands. We are inspired by the planning, property, and development team of decades past as we repurpose downtown as a greener, livable place. And this view of Waterfront Drive, what it used to look like and what it looks like today, gives me a whole lot of hope about maximizing site potential, what we're talking about in this segment. Since December 5th, 2023, which is when the Housing Accelerator Fund agreement was signed with the federal government, PPD has issued development permits that surpassed our original targets within this time frame by 33%. That's thanks to everyone's teamwork on the continuous improvement on planning, property, and development processes, and also the collaboration across all departments of the city. And so since I started this job on January 31st, 2023, we are focusing really on doing the biggest little thing that we have time, budget, political will, and staff capacity to do, building some trust, and then doing the next biggest little thing. So those commitments regarding zoning are currently charted to occur over about 4.25 years. Those were underway early last year by exempting different types of development that even need permits, also doing a number of rapid zoning bylaw amendments to take parking minimums to zero for Portage and Pembina within the mature communities and make residential development easier downtown and adopt the infill guidelines. And now we're working on bucket 3. Bucket 3.1 was the malls and corridors, which was effective at the end of January. And now we are working on infill housing, which will be is scheduled to start up its public hearing on June 2. And so those Housing Accelerator Fund commitments mean that we will have a decision on those bucket 3.2 bylaw amendments by June 12 of this year. And then by December of this year, we have committed to hiring a consultant for a comprehensive zoning bylaw rewrite to bring it more into line with today's market demands and complete that zoning bylaw rewrite by December 31 of 2027 for consideration by council sometime the following year. So right now we are in bucket 3, and that's really what I would like to share with you today on how these zoning amendments will help folks maximize their zoning potential. So the malls and corridors planned development overlay is a zoning tool that applies to the corridors, which you see here in gray, and then these larger mall sites that you see also in gray. And it's in alignment with adopted policies that are seen in Complete Communities 2.0. And so what that looks like is for these areas that the building height is in proportion, almost 1 to 1, to the right-of-way width where it's located. So it's context sensitive in that manner, but it still has a 45-degree angle if it is abutting or across the lane from single family, two family, or residential multifamily small. And for the malls and corridors PDO, you still have 3 options. Your option 1 is just to use the existing underlying zoning that's there today, which means you can build strip malls and baby box and big box retail, or you can go through the normal community committee and city council public hearing process and ask to write your own rules. Or your third option is to comply with this malls and corridors plan development overlay, which means that as long as you're willing to build in a complete community format with privately owned public spaces and the buildings coming up and addressing the street to shape these outdoor rooms and allow that mix of compatible uses where you have pedestrian-oriented streets and auto-oriented streets. One is all about spending time, the other is all about saving time. Then you can use this as of right plan development overlay and just be administratively approved. So we're starting to get our first applications under these new regulations and helping to deliver on the housing affordability crisis that the city is experiencing right now, with 2% vacancy rates on rental. And sometimes, when you're purchasing a home, you might have 20 different offers on a single home and driving those costs upwards. So this is seeking to create more dwelling units and close proximity to job centers and transit, and just allowing people to have more choice about how they move through the city as well as how they dwell here. Because in the last 3 years, the city of Winnipeg has grown by 71,000 people, and our housing stock is certainly not keeping up with that. Then the next zoning bylaw amendment that we're working on now is all about infill housing. So city council back in November of 2023, when they agreed to accept those Housing Accelerator Fund dollars, they gave us these series of tasks to do. And so this is yet another one of those tasks. So all 4 of the zoning bylaw buckets or different initiatives that we're working on now are part of that Housing Accelerator Fund initiative. So this next one is to allow up to 4 dwelling units on low density residentially zoned lots throughout the city. And so we sat with infill housing developers, and we worked through the sorts of housing that they are interested in. All the presentation material is on winnipeg.ca/infill housing if you want to go check it out. We have a Q&A period running until, actually we just extended that to end on May 7. And then we have a whole series of open houses with this public hearing to start June 2. In order to write these draft rules, we sat down with infill housing builders and other housing advocates to say, hey, what are the parameters of the existing zoning that don't work that well today? And what could we tweak to make these more in keeping with today's demands for what folks the sorts of places people would like to live. So this example is a triplex. This draft zoning says you need to allow one parking space per dwelling unit. So you can kind of cheat and look and see how many dwelling units this is based on how many cars are here. And so sitting with the development community and actually designing the plans to see what would work for, in this example, this is a triplex here, and how can we write the rules to be as respectful as possible to the surrounding property owners, or homeowners or renters, while still providing this residential that's really missing today. So it was important for us to model these out on real Winnipeg streets and understand all of the geometries of the space and all of the ways that the community fabric would be intact, all the ways that it could also be the maximum that the federal government is asking us to do. They are now saying that, in addition to housing funding, also our infrastructure funding, like for the North End treatment plant, and our transit funding that would be from this federal government would be contingent on us changing the zoning bylaws to allow this gentle density to occur. So this is an example of the most intense example that the government is asking us, which is only for the properties that are within 800 meters of a frequent transit stop, and for the buildings that are proposing 4 dwelling units. Those properties would be allowed to go up to 4 stories in height. We really don't think we're going to see that much of this type of development, only because once you go up to that 4th floor for visibility purposes, you would need to install an elevator. So for a 30-foot by 40-foot building, that's going to add about $200,000 to the cost of the building. So we think that most of the infill will probably be more in the 2 to 2.5 story sorts of formats, because you can still get that duplex, that triplex, that fourplex. Most of these images I'm showing you here are 4 dwelling units on this single lot. And so you can do that easily without going up to that more expensive 4 stories that the federal government is asking us to consider. So, working through all of these different ways to maximize your site potential while not making your neighbors too grouchy is that fine line that we're trying to walk, and find some common ground between our housing needs and between what the community would be comfortable with. And so within those parameters, we have said there are these different ranges of the minimum lot width that would be required to enable those different types of developments. And so once again, check out winnipeg.ca infill housing for all of the additional future ways that you can come out and share your ideas on this topic and get more information from us and speak with a city planner on the topic. The bylaw itself will be online in late May for that public hearing starting June 2. So why does all this matter, especially now? Before I took this job, I worked on this book that you can find on Blurb, which basically takes the 5 most frequent place types or complete communities that you find within the region, and that are walkable mixed use complete communities, along with the 4 most frequent drivable single use place types, and looks at, we drew every rooftop and said, okay, if we draw a circle that's the 5-minute pedestrian shed, that's a 5-minute walk from the center to the edge, about 400 meters or about a quarter of a mile. So that each of the circles you're going to see in the rest of this presentation are 160 acres. What can we learn from our existing complete communities, and how can we take those ideas and apply them as we are changing the zoning regulations to say, all right, how do we make these transit friendly streets with these cafes and shops institutions that are anchors to the neighborhood, along with multifamily housing, parks, and schools. And what can we learn even from the density places like hamlets, like this is an example of from Brunkild? And, what can we learn from these various different areas like Starbuck, which is a village where you see that just 2 blocks of Main Street anchors this entire community where you have a multi-generational living and a lot of different housing types provided here, or the town of Stonewall, where 4 blocks of Main Street anchors the whole town, and everyone is no more than a quarter mile or a 5-minute walk to a long view into nature or ag lands, which we know contributes significantly to well-being. And then looking at the drivable single-use place types like Pembina Highway, I took a pedestrian shed here that was one of the most dense ones in order for it to perform a little bit better than most. Or the job centers, like this is an example of up in Selkirk, Red River College, our RC Polytech, and the Regional Health Center, looking at opportunities not on the parkland, but on the giant swaths of parking space. How could we allow some completing of these single use communities? And that's the same is true for our single use low density subdivisions. So we already know that even 2 blocks of Main Street can anchor a whole lot of homes. So looking for opportunities on how that could be infilled over time and connected to complete our existing communities. And then finally, rural residential like Hillside Road at Deacon Road and Springfield, and looking at that as well. So it's all about allowing that density range and how that they can come together in a way that completes our communities. Because when we look at our complete communities across the region, we see that these spiky bits are the complete communities, and those are also the parts that are generally illegal with our single use zoning. So that's why we're changing it. And so it's not about outlawing any of these various place types we just looked at. It's more about how to manage this portfolio of place that we have. And if you're going to infill around strip commercial, like using the malls and corridors PDO, and take it to, some mid-rise mixed use, you should anticipate, a significant bump in your property value per meter squared between those two. Same is true taking job centers to a town or a single-use low-density subdivision to a walkable mixed-use neighborhood. But there are some places we don't want to densify, like farmland and rangeland, because they have other value drivers like food production and reduction of long haul trucking and making us more resilient in the face of tariffs and that sort of thing. However, the rural residential could be have some gentle density to get it up to a hamlet and provide some other options for folks. So wow, that is a short presentation, but with that, I will stop sharing screens so we can have some conversations. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of this great information and wonderful context. We're going to see what we have in the chat. So, coming from Bill, how will the city lead in allowing innovative housing on the Bay stores? Footprint at Polo Park and St. Vital malls. The transit, the amenities already in place.
Great question. And now because of the malls and corridors PDO, both of those malls would be allowed to use that plan development overlay to enable them to have as of right development um, today surrounding that mall. As far as the store itself, the Bay store itself, they certainly could do that because now they're allowed to do that as of right. I haven't seen developers come who own those malls coming forward with plans for that yet. So far, I think, most of what both of those two malls have shared publicly is they're very interested in densifying the parking lots around the mall. So it still remains to be seen on those two Bay stores. Obviously, the Bay store downtown with Waywane Algonquin is certainly doing exactly that. So always an option.
That's such a great project. We had a presentation on it about a year ago, and it was so good. All right, so from a high level, coming from Chris, what are the expected changes in city costs and revenue for downtown redevelopment? And similarly, urban densification versus greenfield development.
So great question, Chris. We don't have precise numbers for the expected changes in city costs for downtown development. But when other cities have done that analysis, they have found that the sort of compact mixed use development of bucket 3.1 and 3.2 that I was just sharing with you to city coffers, that is anywhere between a third and a half less expensive for the horizontal infrastructure of streets, water, sewer, and sidewalks, and about 10% less expensive for services. So that's on the expense side, and then on the revenue side, that mixed use mid rise of approximately 5 to 6 stories. Even though, of course, the malls and corridors PDO enables significantly more than that, would generate approximately 40 times more revenue per acre than the more low density suburban formats. That's probably the shortest answer I could give to that, although I could talk on that topic all day long. And we are running more numbers on that. Just the malls and corridors footprint alone, if it were to redevelop in a medium range, it would increase tax revenues to the city. It would provide tax revenues to the city in an increase of about $250 million a year. So it is a significant number. Now, of course, the amount of water and sewer upgrades to enable that development is something that we would expect more over a 20-year time horizon. Like, it's not going to happen tomorrow. So the zoning is just one of the barriers that we're removing. Then the infrastructure is another barrier in addition to
Mm.
that.
Yes. Next question. When trying to densify neighborhoods, how do city planners tackle resistance from people not so affectionately known as NIMBYs or not in my backyards?
Yeah, that one's tricky. There are many reasons, many ways to have that conversation. Obviously, first and foremost, there's over $200,000 with $200 million, almost $300 million actually, of federal funding that is it requires us to make these types of zoning changes. So while I understand that people want their neighborhoods to stay, some people want their neighborhoods to stay precisely as they are today. Um, First of all, those federal funds require us to get more fiscally responsible in how we enable places, but then also it's that need for us. The housing crisis is at crisis levels now, and so we have a duty to provide housing to folks. And then additionally, there are so many other um, dynamics happening that we could spend a lot of time on this question as well. But, when we have the baby boomer generation starting to want to downsize out of their large homes, many other cities are starting to notice that as they want to downsize, it's those larger format homes that are becoming the market's getting long in those because there aren't as many of the millennial generation and Gen Z who are able or interested in buying those larger homes, and so that's one of the reasons that, the zoning changes that we're showing you now, you would actually be able to retrofit existing houses as well to make an existing home more easily into a duplex or 3 dwelling units per lot or 4 dwelling units per lot as well. So all of those conversations together, I think, help us find more common ground between the YIMBYs, the yes in my backyards, and the NIMBYs, and we have noticed them in pretty spirited conversations with each other in our public information sessions so far.
Good old public dialogues. Yeah, so what kind of design guidelines will be required for projects that increase density through infill in existing neighborhoods? What renders presented have a substantially higher finish quality compared to what we often see on built infill projects?
That's right. So, with respect to zoning, zoning cannot regulate architectural style. So while it's true that the renderings I just showed you were the architectural style that the most people that we were speaking to were interested in, you could certainly, and they also reflect the historic housing stock in the older parts of Winnipeg, which are the areas of the city most likely to redevelop. And the newer areas of the city, of course, those homes are more recent, so they aren't as likely to be renovated or redeveloped in the near term. So while there are design guidelines that are being proposed that regulate things like maximum length that one wall can be exterior wall can be, or the maximum amount you can have, for instance, a dormer as a percentage of the building as a whole, or that sort of things. We can't regulate architectural style unless you're in a historic district, and we only have a few of those. So, um, so the renderings I was showing certainly, um, I I would maybe argue that they aren't necessarily higher finish quality. They might be a different design type, type than we are seeing in our infill houses now. However, part of this process was to say, what are the things that people dislike the most, and how can we regulate those away?
Yeah, makes sense. Are the guidelines for the types of density housing with regards to, sorry, are there guidelines for the types of density housing with regards to ownership? Do developers sell to investors who will rent them out, rentals versus owned, etc.?
So that's another thing zoning can't say. It can't say the tenure of the building. We can't require a type of ownership from the city perspective, and so also we don't create guidelines with regards to ownership. So, in other cities who are enabling this type of gentle density and fill housing, you're seeing. Um, a lot of people who live in the buildings that they're then renting out, and they become landlords. So I'm a landlord. I decided to save a historic church that's 120 years old in St. Boniface. And so I live here and I made it into apartments in order to, help pay the heating and cooling and property tax and whatnot. So I think that's what we're gonna see a lot of other people, going that route, and so, as far as the guidelines that we're providing, they're more along, the financial guidelines to say, "Hey, if you wanna do this, here are some, um, general financial statements that if you're going after CMHC financing, these are the sorts of financial statements they're gonna wanna see. This is the type of numbers that we're seeing in Winnipeg." So providing that sort of, supports to the community, is something we're, working on.
Wonderful. So, the big question, is there any talk of eliminating parking requirements like other cities have done, especially in areas close to transit?
There is talk of that. You remember at the beginning of this when I was talking about the biggest little thing that we have political will to do today. And so the parking requirements have been fully eliminated if you're on Portage and Pembina in the mature communities portion of the city. So those parking minimums have already been taken to zero. Now that doesn't mean developers won't build any parking. They'll build however much parking that their financial supporters tell them they need to build in order to be successful. However, and there's also if you are providing affordable housing, say you were building 4 dwelling units on one lot and it was all affordable, then you would only need to build one parking place. If you were building 3 dwelling units on one lot and they were all affordable per CMHC definition, then you would not need to build any parking. There has been some discussion of additional federal requirements that if you are within 800 meters of frequent transit corridors or within 800 meters of higher learning institutions, taking those parking minimums to zero as well. But that's still a little bit in flux at this point. So that's not what our current requirements through the Housing Accelerator Fund are requiring us to do.
Okay, so from Cindy, some neighborhoods have heritage value with intact housing stocked. Is there any plans to expand identified heritage neighborhoods?
Uh, so define what you mean by identified heritage neighborhoods. So right now we also are running some studies where we are showing the the homes that don't necessarily have heritage designations, but that are century buildings. So, 100-year-old homes don't have a heritage designation, but have redeveloped within the last couple years as a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex. So we're compiling reports of those homes to share what people have done there. We are also if you are redeveloping an existing structure, there are some of the regulations that are much easier toward folks who are doing that in order to try to save as much of our heritage, our century homes as we can, and certainly our heritage homes as well. Because we don't really think that we'll be able to hit our climate action goals without adaptive reuse of our existing structures and really utilizing the embodied energy in those buildings in a very frugal way.
Yes, indeed. What were those targets? So from Chris, has the city considered a reversed mill rate for high performance buildings to support climate friendly choices?
Uh, not in a um, current way that affects the initiatives that I was showing you at this time. Certainly, the city's climate action plan is something that we're always updating. In fact, an RFP just closed today on that topic, so we are always moving. Um, in a direction of climate action, but as far as a revised mill rate for high performance building to support climate friendly choices, that isn't something that's currently on the table. Uh, Sounds like a great idea.
All right. Yeah, it sure does. All right. So, last question here. The infill housing is basically a developer cheap uh, and do nothing to improve the neighborhood. Watching an infill housing project during construction, I worry about durability of the home and disparity of those who buy them relative to the rest of the community. So, do you have any comments on that angle, the quality of the houses that are being built?
S- Yeah, that is one of the items that this zoning tries to encourage is a better bulk standards for the buildings but as far as the material quality, They must comply with the Manitoba Building Code with respect to durability and, um and so, that's an ongoing part of the dialogue that there's no precisely easy answer to, but one of the many things that, um, cause people to choose some value engineering in their buildings is because of the time it takes to get approved. And so these initiatives are all attempting to drastically reduce those sorts of approval times and hopefully save some of the building budget to make more durable and beautiful places.
All right. Any final comments that you want to make before we wrap this up?
No, except to say thank you to Sustainable Building Manitoba for hosting such a lively and interesting series of conversations. I've really enjoyed the process. So thank you.